Hey everybody, my name is Jeff Koshin West. Welcome to ITB Sunday School. Yet again, we joined together in order to learn a little bit about ITB and hear about some of our orientations having to do with this wonderful tradition. It is August 30th, just before the end of the month. We're moving right on into September, and on this Sunday, we are going to have a conversation about who should be a healer and what do we think about being a medicine carrier and different types of things along those lines. And so there is a running dialogue in the New Age community that, of course, everybody is a healer, and but there is a question oftentimes of like, well, what should I do about that? If I should do anything about it, and how should I go about relating to this experience of maybe having an insight and maybe having a healing experience, and then what do I do with that? And what do I do if I feel like I have a calling or a pull towards, being a medicine carrier, being a healer, or something else along those lines. So that's what we're going to kind of jump into. This month of August has been primarily conversation about shamanic and energy medicine oriented stuff. We talked about soul retrieval. We talked about altered states of consciousness. We talked about those things. Those past videos are not paramount for you to see in order to keep up with this question or with this dialogue. But I will admit the ASC video might be helpful for you. The altered states of consciousness ASC video might be helpful in handling some of the language that we use along the way. So food for thought as far as that's concerned. Let's see, September, I'll just let you know right now, September is going to be dedicated to the singular topic of what are the two foundational practices of ITB and why are they important? What's the value of them? What are they? And then what part do they play in personal transformation and recovery? And why are they the foundational practices? What's the point? So we'll be handling that throughout the month of September, and we'll be working that stuff. All the lectures will be aimed in that direction. Okay, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and hop into this conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and like I said, I hope you get some goodness out of this and hop in with your questions when the time's right. All right, first and foremost, I have to preface this with none of this that I'm about to say is in the category of fact, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some assessments, some perceptions, some experiences that I've accumulated through my own personal journey, but then also talking with others in the energy medicine and medicine carrier field, and talking with folks about being healer, about being capable of healing and their healing experiences and things along those lines. So I really want to emphasize that none of this is like hard and fast truth. None of this is, a lot of the assessments I'm going to offer up here are just basically my suggestion about things and things to consider when you are engaging this question of what I should do if I feel called to be a healer. Is everybody meant to be a healer? Should everybody pursue it? And so we're going to kind of jump into this and kind of get a feel for it. And it's just my interpretations of things and things that I suggest people investigate as they get into this information. So just keep that in mind as we go, and make sure you just carry this information with a gentle hands, as we oftentimes do. So there's that old saying, everybody is a healer, right? Everybody has the capability of providing healing, providing space for other human beings. And we're going to kind of look into that. We can all support our own and others' personal growth. We all have that opportunity. We all have that option. We all have an inclination towards that. And that's a very real thing. The fact is that every human being on the face of the planet, because we all carry our own presence, our own awareness, and we can all listen and witness, because of that, we all have the ability to offer up some type of support or healing or opportunity to create healing for another person and for ourselves. So we all have that in us. And so that's a really sweet idea, and that's a really sweet gesture, and that's really something important to keep in mind. Everybody has that opportunity, and depending on the situation, sometimes those things are more potent than others. And so we want to kind of honor that and accept that and hold that as a real truth in our world. That's definitely something that we've seen over and over and over and over again. When we do healing work or any kind of ritual work or ceremony work. The other thing I want to make really, really clear is that because we are all, every human being is trying to find their way through the world, because we are all trying to find our way through personal transformation, our own recovery process. Because that is real, we also all have a birthright to pray the way we want to pray. We all have a birthright to explore altered states of consciousness and see what we find there, and share what we find there. We all have a birthright towards exploring some of the tools of ancient people's practices or personal transformation practices. We all have a birthright to that. And so I want to make it really, really clear that we're not saying that only certain people can use these things or only certain people should use these things. This is really a birthright to every human being that's born on planet Dirt, okay? Everybody has that option for them. And that's not really the kind of, what's it called? That's not really the hair we're splitting in this conversation. That's really not the primary issue of this conversation. We don't want to talk about this as far as only certain people get to do certain types of healing work. Only certain people get to explore certain types of things in their life. It's a little bit more fascist than my interests kind of take. I want equality for all peoples. I want people to be able to explore their journey and explore their paths as they need. Of course, and as we do in ITB, we suggest discernment. We suggest deep respect and care and concern for other cultures. We also suggest that other cultures may have components that your upbringing or the culture you come from has gaps in. So every culture has gaps. It's inevitable. Even if we were to put forth a strictly integral culture, the reality is there probably still would be gaps, because humans make up the culture and humans have gaps. Human perception has gaps, and human groups have gaps of perception. And so we do suggest and we do support that wherever you come from, you should understand the values and the tools and the beauty that they offer from your own culture, from your own upbringing. And also remember that it is a deeply worthy act to explore other cultures and to see how those other cultures can inform us, but always making sure that we do this in a very honest, very supportive, always responsible, and very respectful pattern, and through consent with people of those cultures to participate in a healthy and clean way. So we 100% support that in ITB. We are all for that reality. A lot of times, when ITB mentees, they come into the tradition, when they start up with us, they'll oftentimes ask me, it's like, is ITB just one style of healing modality? Meaning, are we like one type of Reiki tradition, or do we only do the Ayurvedic kind of chakra system and stuff like that? Or do we only do traditional Chinese medicine? Do we only do a specific style of energy medicine or shamanic practice? And my response to them is no. What you're getting is a very, very broad umbrella type of an education in energy medicine when you come to ITB. And then we kind of give you a taste of several different types of energy medicine or shamanic traditions. And you have the option to find one that blows your hair back and commit to it. So if you find that, and so what I say to the mentees is that if you find something that very much excites you, then dedicate yourself to it. Commit to it. Do it respectfully. Contact the people and get consent and practice with them, and always approach with respect and appreciation, and make sure that they know you're serious about learning that tradition, learning that practice. So we don't get really in ITB. I don't really get really cranky about whatever tradition people want to explore into, and I don't hold the mentees hostage with my own traditions and my own history of traditions that I'm a part of. So we want to keep in mind that yes, everybody is a healer. Everybody has an ability to hold space and to listen to another human being, and that is a large portion of healing. If anybody reads Carl Rogers' work, he's a very humanistic psychotherapy orientation of putting forth the idea that if you're in the helping industry, if you're just simply with the person in a very heartfelt, present way, you're doing healing work. And so a lot of his writing, a lot of his theories come from that basic tenet that if you're just there with someone and being compassionate and being open and receiving them and just being with them in a very honest and clean way, you're doing healing work. And that's great and that's wonderful. So this is a wonderful orientation. Love Carl Rogers, huge fan of him. And that's pretty important stuff. And we want to honor that, once again, every human being has a birthright towards prayer, exploring altered states of consciousness, sharing whatever they find in those altered states of consciousness, and exploring and practicing and playing with the tools of several cultures around the world to see what's going to support their ability to translate and experience reality and then their own selves and their own healing process and their own personal transformation process. So we 100% support that idea. And we do agree that everybody has that potentiality. We also say that there is a difference between the general population's abilities and a person who is then going to commit themselves to a long-term, maybe lifelong commitment of doing these practices. So we do want to discern the difference between the general population's abilities and what makes a person maybe hold the title of healer or medicine carrier or shamanic practitioner, something along those lines. So we want to kind of draw a very specific line in the sand as far as those characters are concerned, because they are a different level of refinement. They are a different level of expertise. There is a very, very, very different quality and level of commitment that these human beings have to these traditions. And so we want to be really, really, really mindful of identifying that discernment. Before we kind of, or I should say, and one of the things that we also need to keep in mind with before I launch into the discerning side of it, like what's the difference? What is a person like that has committed their life to this, has kind of invested their whole world into it and built their world around it. Before we jump into that, there's also the fact that what I've noticed oftentimes is people come from different backgrounds. They get into jobs, they get into practices and stuff like that. And along the way, they can be doing a job, they can be, living their life, and all of a sudden they have, through their own practice and through their own exploration of the world, they have maybe a very deep awakening. Maybe they have a very powerful shift in their philosophical orientation. It doesn't matter how it arises, but it arises. And that person then feels a strong pull to be a part of making the planet a better place, making the world a better place. Maybe saying something like they want to ease the suffering of the planet. They want to make the world into a place of love and of understanding and having care and concern for each person and equity and different things along those lines. So, and which is all a valid and wonderful thing to do. This is very common with a lot of awakenings of different kinds. This is a very, very common philosophical orientation that comes up. And that's a part of an awakening process, but that doesn't mean you automatically have to put down your job and go become a yoga instructor, go become a massage therapist, go become a chiropractor, a nutritionist or herbalist or something along those lines. Just because you have this insight, just because you have this awakening, does not mean you need to drop what you've committed to and split into a whole nother type of a world. The reality is that there really aren't jobs that are more enlightened or less enlightened. When we have these conversations of spirituality and enlightenment, there really aren't a whole lot of jobs that are better than the others, that are better for spiritual people or better for enlightened people. The fact is that we need spiritual people, we need enlightened people, we need people who want to decrease the suffering of the planet. We need folks like that in all walks of life. We don't just need all these people that have had this insight mashed into the complementary alternative medicine world, okay? I mean, that's great and all, but we also need folks with this orientation that want to ease the suffering of the planet. We need them in police officer positions. We need them in firefighter positions. We need them in grocery positions. We need them as accountants and lawyers and caretakers of all kinds. So we don't want to get into this what I find to be a bit of a pitfall of spirituality, which is if I have a spiritual orientation, or if I all of a sudden have this deep insight and this deep awakening of my heart and of love, that doesn't automatically mean I need to go and drop my job and go into something that I have deemed or others have deemed to be a more spiritual practice. I think it's actually a major loss to the community when a person that makes these insights and has these awakenings, when they leave positions like quote unquote normal jobs or something along those lines, I think it's a not so awesome thing to do. I think the community loses when everybody starts moving to a certain tradition of workforce. I think that it's important to keep in mind that it's just as spiritual to stay in the fast food job, to stay in the construction job, to stay in the litigious work, or stay in the accountant work, or stay in the other fields of human practice and what we call jobs. I think it's just as important for us to stay there and carry those value systems and impact those value systems and find other people who have those value systems in that field or in other fields that complement that field, and work with that moral orientation, work with that philosophical orientation to serve the people, to hold and toe the line of a certain moral orientation and philosophical orientation. So keep this in mind. I think this is of great importance, and this is a pitfall that I think a lot of humans jump into, is just because you have these awakenings doesn't mean you have to drop quote unquote normal job and go into some other thing. Because I've seen plenty of people who have these realizations and somebody has convinced them that they should, because they've had that realization, they are automatically a healer and called to being a healer. They go into massage therapy, they go into these different traditions, and it doesn't work out. It doesn't fit them. So it doesn't fit their interests. It doesn't feel their heart interests. And so just because a person has these insights or has this quote unquote awakening doesn't automatically mean you have to toss out your normal mode of being and all of a sudden go and do, hippie jobs and shit like that. So I want to be really clear about that, because that actually is what pushes a lot of folks into the healing world, the yoga teacher world, the what's it called, the CAM world, the complementary and alternative medicine world. And I think that it's valid in some cases. I also think it's kind of a cliche and it's a misnomer that just because, like I said, just because you had these awakenings doesn't mean you have to go into these fields. So food for thought. So that's going to be the first line that we kind of draw in the sand about this discerning between, yes, everybody's a healer, and some people have proclivities or callings or strong pushes towards it. So that's kind of the first line in the sand I'm going to throw out there, and strongly suggest that anyone, if they're in the spiritual world or part of an enlightenment practice, we deeply want them to review and consult and inquire into with others before they start doing a major career change and different things along those lines. So there's no reason why you have to enter into some other profession just because you had some of these awakenings. Like I said, I still take the position of it's just as important for us to have quote unquote spiritual enlightened accountants, politicians, police officers, managers of fast food restaurants. It's just as important. Okay. So to me, it's almost like it's kind of more important as a massage therapist and a teacher of these things. It limits. I can't go into just going and getting a manager job. It's not something I can do. I would love for kind of a calling in me to be a little bit different, to where there is maybe going into politics or maybe going into law enforcement and different things along those lines to impact those fields in a different way. But it's very clear that this is the kind of the position that I need to take up for a period of time. Maybe in about another 20 years, I'll be doing that. Who knows? But nevertheless, we do want to keep in mind that we need awakened people, spiritual people, people in this moral orientation everywhere in the world, not just in certain jobs or certain, categories of jobs. So we need them all over the place. We need you all over the place. So that's our first kind of line in the sand about who should be doing this. Secondly, let's talk a little bit about the history. Let me share a little bit with you about the history of who became a medicine carrier, a shaman, a healer in ancient peoples traditions. So if we look back into the history of ancient peoples traditions, and this information I'm about to share with you comes from a number of different books on shamanism and healers and medicine carriers of different kinds that I've read throughout the past couple decades. So first and foremost, as far as the history is concerned, this was pretty clear. There was very, 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 very specific ways that medicine carriers were kind of identified. First and foremost, it was a family lineage. All right. In certain ancient people's traditions, if your parent was or your grandparent was a medicine carrier, there was a very high likelihood that you would be then just basically brought into the family business type of a deal. And that is a very common situation that showed up in a lot of different traditions, a lot of different ancient people's traditions, a lot of more contemporary evolutions of those ancient people's traditions. And so that was a natural kind of unfolding. Another one was you were kind of quote unquote picked by spirit. So how they say you were picked by spirit was maybe you survived some very strong catastrophe where the other people died or other people would die, but you did not. So what that looks like is being struck by lightning. Maybe you survived a fire that swept through a region and you survived that bad boy. Maybe you lived through some really bad fall or something along those lines. So there was some kind of life-threatening event where quote unquote chance or the elements, the spirits of the elemental creatures of the world that create weather and these different activities in the world influenced the situation and had an impact upon you. And so that's those are certain ways of being picked to be a medicine carrier. Another way is, this is an extremely common one, usually like a sickness, a very strong sickness, and even a death, and then coming back. So if you had a death experience where you died and then came back to life, if you had an experience where you were extremely sick, quote unquote, on death's door, this was also another way of identifying you. Were kind of like being told by the spirits or of the ancestors who to be picked by the ancestors or by the spirits in order to become a person who could be a medicine carrier. A lot of different traditions also talked about the experience of hearing voices or having visions and different things like that. So oftentimes that can kick up in the ancient and in a lot of the old stories. So these are historically ways that tribes, groups of human beings, ancient peoples kind of identified these very special groups of people, these very special individuals, and how they kind of started ushering them into a certain direction of training and of expertise. The medicine carriers in a culture were pretty specific. Oftentimes there were in several cultures there were folks who had remedies, folks who had understandings, folks who had ability to administer basic healthcare and different things like that, similar to how we have now, where a lot of people know what to do when you have a fever. A lot of people know what to do when you have certain sicknesses come up and different things along those lines. There's a lot of just basic understanding about care for yourself, get some rest, drink water, drink some certain teas, have some herbs, drink some certain foods, stay away from others, and rest. And so there's a lot of stuff where we see a lot of that. Then there's also the reality that these individuals that were medicine carriers were considered very unique creatures. They were oftentimes very separate from the group or the tribe. They sometimes lived on the outskirts of tribe and or visited an area on a regular basis and were always to be found in that area that was away from the tribe. So oftentimes they would be reclusive to a certain extent, and they would oftentimes not be subject to a lot of the normal functionings of the culture. They oftentimes were responsible for different things, keeping history, keeping stories, performing rituals and different things along those lines. So these human beings were considered different. They were considered a unique group. They were considered sacred in a lot of ways. They were considered not normal human beings, oftentimes considered touched by the gods or touched by spirit or something along those lines. And so they did have a lot of lore around them and a lot of different responsibilities other than normal responsibilities. They did do healings. They did things along those lines. The history of these chosen folks also had a tendency towards keeping histories, keeping stories, and performing rituals and different things along those lines. There wasn't a ton of them within a group, depending on the populations of the ancient people group that we were talking about, the indigenous populations or the ancient culture. There weren't a lot of them. There weren't a ton of medicine carriers, but they seemed to pop up pretty regularly as the hundreds, if not thousands, of these populations started to grow more and more. And this is just what our information around the world has to say about these different traditions, okay? So the history of them is they were oftentimes had some type of intense event that they recovered from, that they survived, and it had something to do oftentimes with a near-death experience or a losing of one's faculties and ability to function. And so these were folks who were oftentimes, once again, cared for in very, very, very kind of special and specific ways and function in a different way. And when these events occurred, they were then oftentimes then ushered off with the correct teachers and ushered off with the correct mentors and caretakers in order to then train them in those tools and of that specific tradition. So that's the usual story that came up historically. And quite honestly, I think some of that stuff still carries over, because near-death experiences of whether it be sickness or catastrophic event, whether it be being struck by lightning or whether it be a life-threatening event because of an accident of some course that occurs in the world, this can bring certain human beings to a certain moral and philosophical orientation in relationship to death. And so this, I think, is still an important part of that. It's not mandatory, but I think that is an important component of this type of healer practice and medicine carrier and different shamanic practitioner and things along those lines. I think there's room for that kind of conversation, but that's also very much a belief system type of an orientation. You have to believe in such things. And it also has some superstition sides to it. So we can carry that one with a whole lot of very softly and be very gentle with carrying that idea. Something else to consider that I think is more relevant, especially nowadays in our current Western or U.S. culture. I'm talking in the U.S., so might as well speak about this culture, right? So what I think is very important is I think there are definitely folks who have a proclivity towards these things. There's definitely folks in the world who love systems, who are fascinated by different cultures, who are fascinated by human beings, who are fascinated by understanding the motivations and understanding the movements and the ebbs and flows of the human experience. I think there are definitely people who are just more interested in that stuff, and they start to basically build a life to pursue that information, okay? And that, I think, is extremely worthy. I think that we need to support humans that do that, and not just in an academic type of a perception, not just in an academic type of way. So I think that's a pretty important delineation, is we have a human being in front of us that is truly impassioned in trying to understand the nuance and also generalizations that go on with singular cultures as well as mass culture, and understanding the human experience and investigating the human experience, not just from an academic experience, but from a personal transformation and personal exploration experience, and truly are kind of madly in love with humanity. And that kind of brings my next suggestion for a person who's going to be a medicine carrier, or going to be the difference between a medicine carrier and a person that's just the general population. The medicine carrier identity, I think, is a person that is just deeply in love with humans, even with all the messes that are around, even with as tragic as some of this human experience can be, even as sideways and abominable as some of our transgressions have been against the earth, but then also other peoples and other creatures, I think still has a deep adoration and a deep love for humanity and for humans and for the human growth process, for the human experience. One thing that becomes really, really clear is, like, the more you learn about humans, the more you learn about the mess that humans are, the more you learn about the abominable actions we have in our history, the easier it is to hate human beings. It's not an easy to see the history of our humanity and how we have enslaved each other, how we have transgressed against each other, how we have waged war upon each other, and then not to mention the other creatures on the planet and the planet, destroyed and poisoned whole ecosystems. It's really difficult to still be in love with humans. You know, at times it's difficult not to just settle into resentment towards a human being, towards all humanity, in fact. And so I think a major component of a medicine carrier person is, no matter what, they are still deeply, deeply in love with humanity and still believe in humanity's evolutionary process, and that there's still more to be seen and possibly very much more good to unfold in the face of this experience on this planet. And I'm not meaning in love with human beings in a naive way. I'm not meaning a love for human beings that is removing of accountability to human beings, removing the responsibility of our transgressions against the world and other creatures in the world. Not a love that absolves us, but holds us accountable. So it's a love that holds us accountable to what we have been through, but also believes that we are not irredeemable, you know, that we humans are still a part of evolution, are still a part of creation, are still a part of the earth. Thus means we can also heal it and choose a different way of being. So I think for a person who is a medicine carrier, one of the foundational needs is a deep, 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 authentic, holding everyone accountable type of compassion and love and almost adoration of humans and of life. So for the medicine carrier, that's got to be in place. And some people think, well, if you've had these awakenings, isn't that in place? Isn't that a foregone conclusion? No, not at all. Not what I have seen. People can have very, very wonderful openings and insights, but they still do shitty things on a regular basis. They can very much have a glimpse and have a very powerful experience of spirituality and interconnectivity and community and unity with whatever they think is their higher power, or with love, or with other humans, or with the planet. They can still feel those things very strongly and still be really shitty, still be really morally lacking as far as their lifestyle is concerned. So they don't go hand in hand. So we want to keep in mind that there needs to be a drawing of a line as far as that's concerned. The next thing, right on the toes of that comment, or right on the heels of that comment, I should say, is the fact that they start to build their life based off of that philosophical orientation. So I think that if you feel you want to become a medicine carrier, or you feel that you are called to be a medicine carrier or a healer of some kind, I think these are some of the things that we need to be really, really mindful of. I need to love humans. I need to love life, and I need to love the catastrophe of life. I need to be in love with the tragedy of life and the messiness of life and the recovery of life. I also need to make sure that I do a lot of work to unpack my moral shortcomings and my commitments in relationship to those moral shortcomings. In order to change our moral orientation and ethical orientation, we need to commit to self-care, to self-investigation and self-inquiry about how we lie to ourselves, how we lie to each other, how we live lies based off of poor beliefs or bad education from parents or guardians or culture. Those things we have to come to terms with those realities. And that's a long-term process. That's not a couple weeks. That's not a couple months. It's not a couple years. That is a lifelong practice. So another tenet of what makes a medicine carrier we can add to this is a lifelong practice of self-inquiry and unpacking and then engaging better and more inclusive moral, ethical orientations and life practices. So these things I think we need to be very, very, very careful with in relationship to considering, am I just a part of the general population that can heal and know these things and be, be helpful in this way? Or am I going to dedicate my life? Am I truly a medicine carrier? I think there is an importance to that thing. And I think there is an important factor in that experience. Building your life around this should be number 3, as far as I'm concerned. The third factor that really does tell the story of, am I a medicine carrier or am I just a person that can do some of these practices? We have to build a life around it. Okay. This is not a half-assed type of a tradition. This is not a kind of a retreat or a relief from the norm. It's when we commit to, if we have a calling, a draw internally to become a medicine carrier or a healer as a lifestyle, as a tradition, we must dedicate our life to the experience. We must dedicate and build our world around that orientation. We have to prioritize that almost above everything else. And so when we do this activity, when we participate in this, in becoming a medicine carrier of some form or another, you are committed to a tradition, you fulfill that tradition, and you continue to practice and use that practice on a regular basis in your day-to-day dealings, in your day-to-day relationships. Every relationship is touched by this moral orientation, this perspective, this mode of being, and this philosophical orientation. And it's, like I said, it's something that you choose. It affects the what's it called, the food you choose to buy. It affects the places you vacation to. It affects the vehicle you drive, the computer or technology you engage in and purchase. You reference that orientation as medicine carrier in the majority of your orientations. And that doesn't mean you have to leave behind all of whatever culture you're in. So, for example, I live in this United States economy and culture. And so to live by that orientation doesn't mean I have to cast off all those things, all the things that come along with the US culture. What I do have to do is I have to be discerning in relationship to them. And I have to find oftentimes in a case-by-case basis, a healthy relationship to whatever is arising in front of me as far as this culture is concerned. So there has to be certain measurements of interaction, measurements of deciding how much I support certain shitty practices and how much I don't, in order to make sure I still show up for the community and make myself available for the community. So when we take these things up, we want to remember that we don't have to run off to the woods. To be a medicine carrier, it's not time to just split from your culture and head out into the woods and make a shelter and live in a way that you think ancient peoples lived. That's actually one of the worst things I think we can do, is to leave the culture. Maybe you'll need to leave your culture in order to get some training, but we desperately, desperately, desperately want you to come back to your culture and share your education. So this is like number 4 in the conversation, is the people call to you, the people need you. You are not a medicine carrier because it makes you look cool at parties, and maybe it works with, the people you want to get romantic with. It makes you look mysterious and cool as you mix it up with the people you're romantically attracted to. We don't do that for that reason. We don't do it because we think we're righteous and, our perception of higher power is going to like us more. And these are badges from our higher power, and they're going to make us more spiritually righteous than other people. One of the primary responsibilities of the medicine carrier is to be there for the fucking people. All right. And this is one of the tenets of becoming a medicine carrier that very much, I think, should be applied from the ancient people's tradition. This was very much an ancient people's tradition guideline for becoming a medicine carrier. If the sick started to come to someone and say, I need to be with you and I'm getting healing experiences from you, or I'm having these really powerful experiences with this person, oftentimes that was also a way of being quote unquote chosen by the people, is you just naturally started to be able to present this stuff. You just naturally started to be able to do these things. And of course, there were stories that came along with that, of course, in every culture. But being picked by the people is very much a tenet of becoming a medicine carrier. And so you have the responsibility to serve the community. You are almost more beholden to the community than you are to your tradition, to whatever tradition you come from. So this is a life of service. This is a life of dedication to community, to dedication to easing the suffering of the planet. And that is well above any kind of priority you kind of have to yourself, or to sometimes even things that you want to have in your life. So we do notice that there are very specific kind of things in modern day culture that we can kind of apply to these human beings who are lifers. So they have a deep connection and love for humanity and all of its grossness, fabulousness, complete fucking shit showness. They are so this person's deeply committed to them as far as that's concerned. They have a very strong feeling of commitment, and they feel a long-term commitment and journey and tradition that they're a part of and they invest into. And that's that they've committed their life to that, and they start to build their life around that. Their prioritization and their interest as far as upholding this and kind of prioritizing as far as the rest of their life is concerned and the rest of their world is concerned. I didn't write all three of these guys down, so I'm kind of forgotten what I said. What a ridiculous situation. But these are kind of the ideas. These are the things that we're shooting for in relationship to a long-term practitioner. And lastly, they're chosen by the people. They are picked by the students come to them. The students find them. The sick find them. They need to be able to carry that stuff, and they need to honor the fact that that's one of the ways they get chosen as well. Responsibilities as a medicine carrier, within your responsibilities, it's not just I'm going to be, freewheeling, healing everybody, there are, like I said before, there are deep responsibilities and commitments and prioritizations to the community that we make. So within the community, it's not just as a medicine carrier, not just healing folks per se all the time. You're also education and educating other human beings is of great importance to be a medicine carrier. You're a key, whether you're educating on personal health, or whether you're educating on relationships, or whether you're educating on the personal exploration experience, or you're educating on the nature of awakenings and realizations in human beings, one way or the other. You're educating your humanity. You are a teacher as much as you are a healer, so to speak. So being a medicine carrier includes those things. So you're an educator in relationship to that. Another major thing that shows up with medicine carriers is that they are keepers of stories and or rituals and ceremonies. So in the ancient people's traditions around the world, rituals and ceremonies were deeply bound to stories. In fact, one of the ways that ritual is defined is that a ritual is some people's definition, one definition of ritual is that a ritual is a recreation of a story of a culture. It's a recreation of a story that was either performed, a myth, so to speak, or an actual event that occurred historically speaking. So the ritual is kind of like a ritual is a recreation of those things. It's a reenactment by new individuals in relationship to that stuff. So when people have a rite of passage or something along those lines, a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, the story is aging. Their story is maturation. The mythology is how in those people's traditions, how people evolved and how people matured from children to adults. So in the rite of passage, the ritual having to do with coming of age, you would be subject to performing and being a part of that old story, and sometimes very much doing theater in relationship to that stuff. So this happens around the world, and this is a very normal component of every ritual ceremony kind of thing. It's a recreation of the myth. recreation of a historical event. And in a lot of situations, the medicine carrier was also responsible for that. So they did healing work, they educated, and they also were responsible for keeping the stories, but then also doing the rituals and ceremonies around those stories, and educating and caring for those stories and passing them on. So they were also responsible for making sure that they honored their mortality and made sure that others came behind them to maintain the traditions, to maintain the community, to care for the community. The medicine care, oh, excuse me, the medicine carrier was not like a separate, it was not separate, I guess, psychologically separate from the community. They would oftentimes separate themselves physically from the community, but they oftentimes separated themselves physically from the community so they could keep a specific perspective in relationship to the community and work, to use maybe their language, work in the spiritual realm or in the ancestral realm in relationship to their population, to their tribe. So the medicine carrier was a very important part of the tribe's traditions and practices and community and different things along those lines. And I think that is still very pertinent for today's medicine carriers. So part of that is, so as we talk about, if you're going to consider yourself a medicine carrier, if you feel strongly that you're being called to a medicine carrier lifestyle, that needs to be a hoop you are ready to jump through. That needs to be a reality that you're ready to carry, is learning these traditions, learning these practices, learning the nuances and definitions and reasoning and ways and whys of these traditions and ceremonies and these myths in order to keep them and care for the people as they go through these processes. I cannot tell you how many times in working with people in my own practice throughout the couple decades that I've been doing this, how much the majority of my work is actually, or the majority of my healing or recovery work is actually because there's been an absence of ritual and ceremony and rites of passage for the people as they've aged. A major issue in our current culture is we just don't have good medicine carriers. We don't have common stories. We don't have good keepers of ceremonies and rituals and things along those lines. There's just not a lot of them around. And so humanity, our general population, is forced to make up their own rite of passage. And that's a fucking shit show, I can tell you right now. So part of the medicine carrier's responsibility is not only doing the healing, but educating, keeping the stories and rituals alive, and then ushering people through that process because they've been called by the people, because they have this strong draw towards supporting the community that way, because they're willing to take up the responsibility mantle of these things. These are probably from where I'm sitting, these are definitely the defining factors between a medicine carrier and a portion of the general population that is maybe just has some, has an ability to heal. Yeah, 100%. Everybody in the world has an opportunity to create healing for themselves and for other people. How much or how little, fuck man, I don't know. That's a toss of the dice. But there are definitely people in the world who are better at it than others. I don't think that's an elitist comment. I think that's a natural thing. I think it's okay to honor that some people have talents that move them closer to this category of this vocation, this great calling, and this position. I think it's okay to honor those talents and recognize that other people just don't have those talents or don't have them the way the refined people or the people who have a proclivity towards them do. I think it's okay for us to see refinement. I don't think it's elitist. I don't think it's backwards. I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it excludes. I think we do need to honor a position of refinement in these traditions, in these practices. I think that's an important part of our cultural recovery and human recovery and planetary recovery. I think we need to honor that certain people do have that calling, that orientation in this world. Now, what we also must honor in this situation is we have to create institutions of education because we honor those refinements. So we can't just say, well, you know, psychotherapists is kind of like a version of the energy medicine carrier or the shaman and medicine carrier of days of old. So we'll just leave it to them. Because I tell you what, when I look at the education guidelines of a counselor or a psychologist or a psychoanalyst, it's lacking. I'll have you say it's very, very much lacking. There is a certain amount of education, and then you're kind of on your own, and it does not tick all the boxes from where I'm sitting. So the counselor education, the psychotherapist vocation, that education, those things, they are seriously lacking in a lot of ways as far as I'm concerned to be qualified as a medicine carrier. Are they qualified to do counseling? Yeah, I think in a lot of ways they very much are. Are they allowed to perform these things? 100% that they've been educated in. But you cannot make a side-by-side comparison and say, yeah, sure, they're the same difference. You know, they're perfectly fine. One supplements the other fine. I think that is unhealthy and naive at best. So there is a strong calling, I think, in our culture, in humanity on planet Earth at this point in time, where we need actual medicine carriers. And that I think there's a very good reason why there has been such a increase of shamanic investigation into what is considered the shamanic realms or shamanic practices, shamanic religious orientations or spiritual orientations, different shamanic rituals and practices. I think there's a very good reason why there's been an uptick in that for the past 40 years, especially in the past 20 or 30 years. There's been just a renaissance of that experience. And I think it's because we as humans on planet Earth are deeply dying for being fed in the way that a lot of shamanic traditions do allow for that. So these are some of the differences I think we can honestly and fairly point out and give some attention to and live by. I think it's worthwhile to point out the difference in refinement, the difference in education, the difference in ability from a person of the general population that understands that, you know, everybody can heal. Yeah, sure. And there's definitely folks out there that are just phenomenal at it, that are great teachers, are great educators, are great storytellers, are great at supporting ritual and ceremony and keeping those traditions and caring for those traditions, and are great at administering healthcare and healing and different things along those lines of the mind or the body or both. So I think it's important for us to be able to have that conversation. I think it's important for us to make that delineation. I do not think, like I said, I do not think it's elitist. I do not think it's discriminatory. I think we need to have discerning to recognize the difference between, yes, everyone can play basketball within a certain range, but there's a huge difference between the general population playing basketball and our NBA, WNBA players, okay? I think we need to honor those differences. And give credit where credit is due, quite honestly. We do have a long way to go. I'll admit to you right away. We do have a very long way to go before we install educational systems for quote unquote raising or educating lifelong medicine carriers. But that's also, you know, that's one of the deep callings in ITB that I have been kind of called to, was to create ITB and to create medicine carriers in the world, to bring them into the world if they so choose to commit to it. It is not for everybody. I'll tell you right now, we've definitely have people that have entered in and don't continue to show up. And that's perfectly fine. I don't have an issue with that whatsoever, because I understand this shit's not for everybody. Not everybody's meant to be a medicine carrier. Not everybody that's in the healthcare field is meant to be a medicine carrier. I don't want to make it sound like there's this synonymous swap out that can easily be done between people in the helping fields and keepers of medicine carriers in this way. I think there's still a stark contrast between the two of those. So want to make that really, 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 really abundantly clear. But my hope in presenting classes like this, or creating opportunities for education like this, my hope in creating education for the mentorship of ITB is very specifically for creating folks who are capable and refined in doing these types of things for the world and being in service to the world in this way. And I've just been lucky enough to find a few of them. and that we've been able to walk together for a while, and we've been able to do this work. So these are some of my thoughts and some of my suggestions and some of my comments on the difference between the general population and a person that ought to carry the title of medicine carrier or shamanic practitioner or healer. So those are some of the delineations. Those are some of the guidelines I think that are valid and worthy of paying attention to. Let's talk a little bit. I want to chime in for a second. Is there any questions or any kind of thoughts, feelings, comments for a second? I'm going to pause for just a second and see if there are any comments or thoughts or feelings that come up. Okay. So we didn't get any questions come up, so that's perfectly fine. And along the way, if you guys are watching this video off a YouTube page and you have a question that comes up with this, please just email me here at embodyingitb@gmail.com, and Jeff will get that email and that question. I'll try and answer that question to the best of my abilities, okay? Anyhow, the last portion that I wanted to talk about on this topic was if I'm going to be a medicine carrier, if I feel that I tick those boxes that I mentioned earlier about being called to it, having a deep love for humanity, committing my life to it, being called by the people, and being willing to be in deep service to humanity and perform these activities. If I say yes to all those things, if it feels like a deep hell yes in my body about that, then the question often arises, well, how should I go about doing it, and what should I do with that? Well, pursue the things that get you excited. Pursue the information and education that gets you excited, 100%. What I often want to say about this topic is if you are considering yourself a medicine carrier already, or if you are working to become a medicine carrier, your best practice is to obviously commit to the education that you've taken up. If you find some education out in the world and take that education up. And that's pretty straightforward. What may not be included in the education that you take up is a need for, and this kind of leads into our September conversation, a need for some very, very, very specific non-negotiable practices. So the first thing I suggest you do, and this is a non-negotiable, the first thing I suggest you do is find a counselor. Find a counselor or psychotherapist that understands kind of what you're up to, maybe even has a background in some of the shit you're up to. There's a lot more now than there was when I was in my 20s. So find a psychotherapist or counselor that has some understanding of what you're interested in and what you want and what you're going through. And talk with them and get with them on a regular basis. See a counselor on a regular basis. Even if you don't let them know about what you're going through and what your goals are, get to a counselor and start talking about your history. Talk about those who raised you. Talk about the traumas you've had. Talk about your own personal injuries you've gone through. Talk about your heartache. Get to a counselor or therapist on a regular basis, even if you have to call fucking 800 numbers on a regular basis because you don't have money or you're struggling financially. Get your ass to someone who can do this stuff, okay? The next thing that comes up for some people is they say, well, can I go to my priest? Can I go to a spiritual counselor, a person that's a clergy person or something like that? Honestly, I've had mixed feelings about this stuff because the reason I bring up a counselor is because they are going to be able to talk to you and coach you and treat you from an educated perspective from psychotherapy and how trauma unfolds and different things along those lines. I cannot say, and you can bet on their education. For a counselor or psychotherapist, you can bet on their education in the field that they're in. They probably have jumped through the hoops. They probably performed in a certain way. And if they've been in the business, if they've been in that industry for at least 10 years, you know that they've kind of seen a lot of different things and coached people through a lot of different stuff. And so you don't have to take everything they say as gospel, but you do have to honor that they are probably going to see some of your damage and help you walk through that damage and coach you through walking through that damage. I cannot say as much for clergy persons, unfortunately. Okay. I know I have some direct experiences of being around priests of different traditions, clergy persons, I should say, of different traditions, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, Christian, the varieties under the sun. where they are kind of shitty when it comes to understanding the human experience. And they are very, very, very much narrow-minded in the dynamism of our humanity. So I would be careful about clergy persons. I would proceed with caution with clergy persons. Now, you still run the risk of that with counselors, but they are also kind of bound, especially if they're around that 10-year mark. Meaning they got out of school in the past 10 years and they've been practicing for the past 10 years. They're probably going to be a lot more open-minded than most of the clergy folks that we're going to find in a certain area. So be careful as far as that's concerned. So definitely see a counselor, see a therapist, and start doing that work. If you feel that you don't have the money for that, I would highly suggest you prioritize that monetarily. All right. I think it's important for us to see that we need to put our time and money into our mental health and into dealing with this stuff, just like we would want to put our time and money into paying, or not paying, but monetarily supporting a person that was teaching us a tradition. So if you go out, like when I've been going to Lakota Sweat Lodge, Lakota based Sweat Lodge for 12 years now, maybe more, almost 15 actually. Let me refrain from that. Almost 15 years now. Pretty much every time I go up, I still put money in their collection box. Okay. I still give money to the people who are upholding these traditions. They're not taking money for those ceremonies. They're not taking money for that ritual, but they have bills to pay. They want to put food on their table. They are taking time out of their life in order to perform this ceremony, this ritual, this sacred act. And for me, knowing the world that we live in, you can't barter everything. And dollars are dollars. You can use those suckers for all kinds of stuff. So I think it's important for us to understand that, no, we're not taking money for ceremony. No, they're not taking money for ritual. There may be very, very specific guidelines in that, depending on what tradition they're in. But I think it's still important for you to monetarily support those people. And to find out how they need to be supported. Maybe money is not as important as, as we may think. Maybe they need food, maybe they need lumber, maybe they need some barter situation. But the majority of the time, in my experience, the majority of the time, pretty much every teacher I've been under, they don't need another cool necklace. They don't need another offer of body work. They don't need another offer in trade for, some errand to be done. They need money. They need dollars. They need cash in order to pay their bills, because everybody wants to barter with them. Everybody wants to give them, something that's going to be a treasure or a gift or some shit like that, and they need money. I've never been around one of my teachers where pretty much everybody is giving them a gift or some type of other kind of barter type of a situation. And that's terribly sweet. But I can guarantee you the majority of the teachers that I've spent time with, the money is extremely helpful for them, especially when they have desperate situations. So as the teacher ages, which a lot of my teachers are aging, money is more important than some gift I could give them. Money is more important than some trade of food or vocation or something like that. It's amazing how many of them just need money to get what they need to get in order to get by and get what they need to do. So when you do take up education with folks, when you do take up practice with some of these folks, remember that it is okay to provide for them monetarily. It is okay to support them monetarily. And it's, especially if we're living in a especially if they do not have a lot of money and we're living in this American type culture, in this capitalistic type of culture, sure as shit they need that stuff. So something to keep in mind as far as that's concerned. We want to make sure we prioritize that, and thus we also want to prioritize and make our own money to make sure we can put that forth towards our own counseling and healthcare. So first and foremost, if you want to be a practitioner, got off on a little tangent there, sorry about that. First and foremost, though, if you want to be a medicine carrier, get your ass in with a counselor or a life coach that knows this stuff, or with a psychotherapist that knows this stuff, that can help you through the personal transformation, personal inquiry process. Or, you know, hey, find an ITB steward and we'll help you out. Myself or an ITB steward, and we'll help you out. The next thing I'm going to suggest is deeply commit to learning the skills and practices and stories of whatever teacher you're under. No matter what age that teacher is, get with them, spend time with them, even outside of quote unquote class time or education time. Get their consent to just spend time with them and helping them out in different ways. A lot is transmitted through just being around a teacher, oftentimes. So this is definitely another way that we suggest you do this and do your education. So commit to your education, commit to that whole practice. Another thing to do if you want to be a medicine carrier on a regular basis, get your own shit going as far as your own practice is concerned. Come up with a practice and commit to it. Get yourself some journals, get yourself some empty journals or sketchbooks, and you need to start writing down, the lies you tell. You need to start writing down the insights you have. You need to start writing down your process as you do shadow work and counseling with your counselor, with your coach, or doing your own shadow work on a regular basis. You need to be writing that shit down. You need to be writing down your meditation log. You need to get another thing that's going to mention how your meditation process goes. Speaking of meditation, you need to be doing a meditation practice on a regular basis. Now, my own suggestion for you is make sure that that some of your meditation practice, if not all of your meditation practice, is focused on a witness consciousness type of meditation. If you want to know why you should do a witness consciousness type of meditation, join us next week in September, the first week of September, when we start talking about witness consciousness meditation, because it's part of our foundational practices in integral transformative bodywork. But get yourself a steady practice of witness consciousness meditation. It's going to do wonders for you. It's going to support your process of witnessing and watching, doing your own healing, of stabilizing as we can say, to use quick and dirty language, your truest self, your truest awareness. It will support that process. It'll decrease the amount of it'll increase your integration of trauma. It'll increase your ability to fall in love with human beings and with life. It'll increase your ability to stay awake and aware in the face of tragedy, both whether it's your tragedy in your life that's happening or the tragedy that's happening in someone else's life. Witness consciousness has payoffs all over the place. So make sure in your meditation practice, at least 50% of your meditation practice is focused on witness consciousness meditation. Other types of meditation that are out there are visualization based, are body based, or physiologically based. They're focused based, or they're mantra based, or something along those lines. Those are also very valuable. They're very helpful. But what the great teachers of almost every tradition agree upon is it is the witness consciousness meditation that lives within their tradition, which is the thing that is probably of most importance, because it drives us to the realization we've been trying to realize the whole time. So these are some suggestions we would make. So get with a counselor, get your do your education, follow up with your education, and commit to your education wherever that education is. Commit to your own home practice, which means get those fucking journals out, man. You need a lie journal, you need an insight journal, you need a meditation journal, you need a shadow work journal. And if you need journals for just dumping or just kind of like venting, have a journal for that. And then make sure you have a meditation practice. And as I said, primarily a heavy meditation practice that is heavy with witness consciousness meditation practices. These are my suggestions for if you want to be a medicine carrier. This is not a simple practice, I can tell you that. This is not a weekend retreat. This is not fun most of the time even. It oftentimes doesn't allow for certain types of relationships, all right? you will most likely have to sacrifice certain types of relationships with people if you become a medicine carrier because of the responsibilities that it calls upon. So these are things that need to be considered along the way, that you will have, in order to be refined. Let's say this, in order to excel in refinement in any domain of human investigation, you must sacrifice other things in order to spend the time refining in that direction. So for example, if you want to be a great musician, you have to kind of have a proclivity towards being great. That's first and foremost. That has to kind of be a thing in your body, in your system, and in your drive, okay? Next thing is you got to practice your fucking ass off. You have to be committed to learning as much as you can about your musical instruments. Say you're a cellist. You have to learn cello as much as possible. Not only learn how to play your cello, but it's also going to increase your probability of mastery if you understand the history and the different components of the cello throughout history and through the making of it and the construction of it and the way that other people have refined and mastered their relationship to the cello. So if you want to be an incredibly good cellist, an incredibly good anything, you have to commit to a regular practice, daily practice, several practices a day in order to become refined in what you are putting yourself into. So that means that you will have to give up other things, other opportunities, other things that other people find normal. And you have to seriously consider that. If you feel strongly that medicine carrier is in your future and that's what's up for you, these are the types of things I suggest you consider. Are you willing to make those sacrifices? Are you willing to have an abnormal life? Are you willing to practice in this way? Are you willing to listen and commit and what's that word, that last one? Surrender. There it is. Are you willing to commit? Are you willing to practice? Are you willing to surrender to the refinement that this tradition is going to demand from you? Okay. So if you're a cellist, you have to kind of surrender to becoming a master cello. The master cellist is kind of like this thing that asks everything of you, asks an enormous amount of you, and you kind of have to surrender that over. So oftentimes, this is the suggestion we make in relationship to going forwards as a medicine carrier is you better be ready for these things, because if you actually commit your life to this, if you believe that you want to carry this type of title, your ass better take a really, really, really long look at yourself and at the life you want to have and of the life you've already had already. So these are some suggestions from me. Like I said, none of these are straight up fucking facts. You can do with them what you want. These are based off of 25, 26 years of investigation into this topic, 25 to 26 years of my own personal exploration of this process in my own life, for my own life. And you can do with them what you want. I hope that's been helpful. I hope it's made some things clear. But today we've tried to answer the question of who should be a healer or a medicine carrier and who shouldn't be, and kind of honestly kind of face that question and give you some guidelines about how to proceed in that direction or not proceed. I think it's just as honest. I think it's just as responsible. I think it's just as loving to not go in this direction. If these things don't sound great to you, if you don't feel a strong momentum towards this information and you're struggling with this a little bit, don't show up. All right. Keep that in mind. It's okay to recognize that this isn't for you. Okay. Just like it's okay to recognize that parenting is not for you. It's okay to recognize that marriage is not for you. It's okay to recognize that, working for the almighty dollar for not just another dollar amount might not be for you. It's okay to make these realizations of what's not right for you. That's just as valid as finding out what is right for you. But in this field, what I have found is that there is less conversation about this is how we decide this isn't for me, there's less conversation about that as there is in different fields, because I think people are kind of scared about actually having this conversation. I think other educators and energy medicine practitioners and healers and medicine carriers are kind of scared to have this conversation because it sounds elitist. It sounds, discriminatory, and that's not what we're shooting for. We're looking for this conversation of, hey, we need to honor refinement. We need to honor discernment. And I think it's naive to say, hey, everybody can be the greatest healer in the world, because it's the same thing as saying, hey, everybody can be like Michael Jordan, or everybody can be like Kobe Bryant, or everybody can be like some, pioneer in the field. That's bullshit. It's just not true. So we can be great at stuff, but we also have to remember that we're also sometimes bound by our own abilities. So we want to honor those differences, and we want to talk about those differences, and we want to keep in mind that it's a worthy conversation and worthy investigation to have with yourself before you just go off on some foregone conclusion or obligatory orientation of, hey, I had this realization, or maybe I tripped on some mushrooms. I'm really starting to dig this hippie life, this neo hippie life. I'm really starting to dig this whole woke culture and stuff like that. That doesn't mean you have to go into massage therapy. It doesn't mean you have to go into any of the CAM fields or anything along those lines. It just means that you've had this insight. And if you're a person who picks up trash, I would love for an enlightened person to be picking up my trash on a regular basis. I would love, if you're an accountant, I would love for my accountant to have these same perspectives and this deep love for humanity and wanting to ease the suffering of the planet. I would love if my politicians, if my haircut person, my my peace officers and EMT people, if they have this philosophical orientation, this deep love of humanity and unbound connection to easing the suffering of the planet. I would love for that to be the case. So I hope this has been helpful. Hopefully this has not been too much of a ramble session, but nevertheless, thank you for showing up. Thank you for your for participating. Thank you for listening. Those of you that are catching this on YouTube, thank you for your attention and your clicks. Speaking of YouTube, if you're on YouTube, head on over to our YouTube channel. Make sure to ring that little bell and become a subscriber. You'll see all of our our latest offerings as far as that's concerned. We will continue to upload these Sunday schools onto our channel so everybody can use them as they want. If you want to give us a donation, once again, donations go to Integral Transformative Bodywork. They don't go to Jeff, they go to ITB and support functioning of ITB. We suggest a donation of around $15. You can do that through PayPal or Venmo. Just look up Jeff Koshin West or Integral Transformative Bodywork on any one of those platforms, and you'll see information as far as that's concerned. Donations are not obligatory. It's, if you can, you can. It's not a big deal. We're going to still be turning out this material no matter what, so that's that. Otherwise, deep gratitude. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much for supporting ITB. And we will see you next month in September for more conversations. Once again, more conversations about, oh, I gotta, hold on one second. I'm gonna pause it up real quick. So here I am doing the closure out here, and all of a sudden I got a really great message from one of our participants. So their message is, what is a tradition or myth/ceremony that you believe Americans need to know or learn in your opinion? I guess how I'm going to translate this one is like, what is the best, what do I think would be like, if I could pick one myth or ceremony or ritual to bring back into American culture right away, what would that be? I would say it would be like rite of passage. Rite of passage would probably be the best, because in the rites of passage for, and I'm sorry, rite of passage for maturation. Rite of passage for maturation includes our interaction with death as we go from the child or the young person's body experience to the adult person's body experience, moving from child psychology to adult psychology and what that looks like. Within those, traditionally, within those around the world, what happened was every rite of passage having to do with maturation, you got an education on your own anatomy. You got an education on other gender anatomies and stuff like that. You understood how children were made. You understand how life began. You understood how to relate to these things, and basically they gave you a sex education type of class. The other thing that happened was you were taken kind of through this, you were taken through the ritual and through the story, which was oftentimes harrowing. Oftentimes the young people, whether they were males or females, they were put into an intense process of some kind or another. Now, since they usually stuck with pretty binary types of gender orientation in a lot of these old traditions, the women's practices and the men's rite of passage compared to the women's rite of passages could be, starkly different. But each one of them had an intensity to it. Each one of them had a celebration of, this is the end of your childhood experience, and this is the beginning. So it's a death of your childhood and a birth of your adulthood into a new life. And there was a lot of things that went into these rite of passage rituals. There was a lot of education, there was a lot of storytelling, there was a lot of guidelines about how to now proceed in the community. What you could do as a child was different than what you could do as an adult. Okay, so I mean, kids could get away with a whole lot of different shit in these tribes, whereas adults were held to a different norm, and they were very much pointed to that when you moved into adulthood, you were directly responsible for maintaining the container, for maintaining the community, and you had to uphold those responsibilities. And that was a part of adulthood. It's what you kind of owed the tribe to a certain extent. They may not use that language, but you had a commitment, you had a responsibility to the tribe, to the people, in order to live and proceed and participate in a very, very certain way. Now, that was usually very wide open and very free in a lot of ways, but there was still this kind of guideline of, you need to understand this shit's not okay anymore. This kid shit you were doing is not okay anymore, and this is how you need to orient. So in the coming of age, rite of passage type of thing, there was a lot of really beautiful ritual that came up. There was a lot of really beautiful practices in education that taught us about death, taught us about etiquette, taught us about our relationship and our responsibilities, taught us about our worthiness and how we belong to the community and our belonging in community and to people. Oftentimes it gave us some roles to get into, and it gave us the option of roles. So this rite of passage was a really, really powerful one. The maturation rite of passage was a very powerful one and very inclusive one in most cases. So I think that one is probably one of my favorite, because, a lot of what we bump into, in my experience of doing a lot of this coaching work and personal transformation work with other people, and also personally, has been all the shit I lost, or I didn't, all the shit I wasn't exposed to, because my people don't have a rite of passage ceremony. The closest thing my people have to a rite of passage ceremony is go get drunk and go to a strip club. That's in as a male in the community that I was in, that was your rite of passage, and that was what you did. Slightly more tame would be maybe, get into college or go and, for the sexual experience, it was finally have sex. But I mean, there was no ceremony about it. There was no recognition of worth about it. There was no education about it. There was no revealing of the deeper nuances and responsibilities I now had to the community. It was a lot of stuff in our culture and a lot of stuff in US culture is very implicit. You're just supposed to get it. They don't actually say it to you. And if they say it to you, they say it in a really shitty way, in a very sick way. And so this is what I think is probably very, very important. If I could choose one, I would probably choose this one, because it involves just so much of what we need as human beings. And the majority of the population that I run into, and whether I'm working with them in a professional way or whether I just see them in the world, these are the issues that I find to be most common is rite of passage issues. And it's all over the place. It's a pandemic as far as I'm concerned. So that's my question. That's my answer as far as that's concerned. Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your feedback. So we're going to go ahead and close on out. And those of you that are on the call right now, you can hang out for just a second. I'll say goodbye to you individually, but I'm going to say goodbye to this group real quick. Thank you, all of you, for participating. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you for participating. See you every Sunday, Eastern Time, noon, here in the magically damp, humid, warm, ever chaotic region of Georgia. Love you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.